All right, just a little more right there, and listen. Alright, so I finally watched it. People keep commenting on my videos being like,
"Oh, I love your makeup, you must watch Euphoria."
No, I'd never watched it. That just came completely from my creative mind and also the fact that I copy Hayley Williams and everything she does. Alright, so I watched Euphoria over the weekend, and there was a lot of discussion, I feel like, that can be had around the show, and it's probably already been had around the show. I wanted to make this video to kind of contribute to the conversation about Euphoria. I know there's tons of videos out there you could watch, but I've not watched them because I don't like to watch other people's videos before I make my own, because I don't want any outside influence on my own opinion before I have a chance to express it, because I want this to just be a raw form of my own thoughts and opinions on the show and how it's good and also how it's bad. Forgive me if I bring up a point that's already been debunked or whatever. This is just raw. I've only seen the show and not watched any other commentary about it other than my own in my own brain. Thank you. I think I'm just gonna get right into the pros so that anyone who liked the show won't immediately click off, because I do have some cons and there's some serious ones. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say this now. There are more pros than cons listed on my little list right here. However, the cons are so big that they sort of outweigh the number of pros as far as the substance of them, if that makes any sense. So the first pro I want to mention, and I'm sure everyone can agree on because I'm sure it's like everyone's favorite thing about the show, is the cinematography, is how it's shot, because it is shot so much like a music video in every episode. I love the way they play with the lights and the coloring in each scene and stuff to kind of portray a feeling. It's not shot like a regular TV show or movie where it's just like person's head talking, other person talking, wide shot, mid shot. Like, it doesn't just follow a formula. It like moves with the story, and I feel like it's one of those shows that you can't just like watch and listen to while scrolling through your phone, because you're going to miss something in the way that it's being presented to you visually. I love when a show is more than just using the cameras for showing the characters and letting them carry the story, but the cameras and the way they move and the way the lighting moves and the way the lighting color changes, and all of that helps tell the story and carries it on its own. I also loved when it would sort of play make-believe, like when Rue would teach something, or whenever she was having a manic episode and it was like her in a police station dressed as a detective, and it kind of makes you curious at some points, like, is she actually dressed like that, or is this just how she's seeing herself? Because it sort of plays on a more fictional fantasy sort of role, and I love that. I love when you sort of can't distinguish if it's the character's mindset or if that's like actually what's going on. Speaking of symbolism, there's the makeup, okay? I know people make fun of the glitter and stuff, but I like it, obviously, because I think it's more than just like, oh, we want them to look crazy and whatever. I think it's just cool to experiment with makeup, okay? Leave them alone, let them have fun. They're teenagers, they're just exploring who they are. But also I think especially with the glitter around Rue's eyes, and whenever they would sort of play along the lines of glitter tears, obviously that means more than just makeup, just how she wants to look, but she may not even in real life, so to speak, have glitter tears, but it's sort of a portrayal of how she's feeling as a character, not just how she looks and if she put that glitter on herself. Does that make sense? Probably not, but it's there to interpret it how you want. I think, of course, they also nailed the drug addiction presentation. Now, I've never been addicted to drugs, but just from what I've observed in real life and what I've studied when I studied psychology, the way Rue's journey is portrayed along the show is very realistic. I don't feel like they over-dramatized it by any means, which I think is perfect, because they could have very easily overdone it or romanticized it in some way, but I don't think they did. Of course, they played a little bit with when she used like more hallucinogenic drugs, or when they used like, I don't know what kind of, I don't know, drugs. And then they're like sitting in her room and they're both looking at each other and they're like, oh, you're so pretty, and they're like glittery. And they make that as a joke, but that's because it's funny. But I don't think that they really romanticize it or glorify it. I think that was just like, well, yeah, I mean, it's just like that 70s show with them smoking weed in a sense. it's just them being goofy because they're stoned out of their minds. And again, they didn't necessarily glorify or romanticize or even underplay the way Rue got addicted to drugs. They didn't show her like partying it up and then just choosing to become a drug addict. They showed that it was the heartbreak of slowly losing her dad to cancer that sort of drove her to want to numb the pain, and starting with his own pain medicine, and that's how she slowly got hooked to it. It's the pain of losing her dad that not only drove her to use drugs, but then continues to drive her addiction. It's not just like, oh, kids these days are doing drugs. It's like, no, this person is hurt and is coping with it in an unhealthy way, and this is how. And of course, I have to mention the presentation of depression and the manic episodes that Rue had. I feel like both were very realistic, and I don't think they romanticized depression like a certain show, because it's gross. It shows her just laying in bed, not even wanting to get up to go pee ever, to the point where she gets a literal kidney infection and ends up in the hospital. Like, that's not cute, okay? That's not pretty. That's not glitter tears. That's just real, raw depression ruins your life. It makes you not take care of yourself in all of the worst ways, to the point where people don't shower, they don't eat, they don't get up to use the bathroom, to the point where they get a kidney infection. That happens. It's not cute. It's not pretty. It's not a girl laying in bed just being sad and wishing that she could get revenge on the people that hurt her by leaving tapes behind after she commits suicide. I'm just saying. And of course, the manic presentation, how it just comes on so suddenly, and it feels like if you don't do everything constantly, you're gonna just lose your mind. Like, you have to do what it is you're obsessed over. You feel like you're going to explode if you don't take care of whatever it is that your brain is like, do now, do this thing, think about this thing, solve this equation. So again, back to the visual media presentation of her dressed like a detective, it's the point of manic episodes take over everything about you, because some people think of manic episodes as just being like happy and fun and laughing at everything, and then suddenly you're really artistic and you want to paint beautiful pictures in the middle of the night and you're Vincent van Gogh all of a sudden. Like, no, sometimes you obsess over things that don't really matter. Sometimes you make a video in the middle of the night about how Disney is going to cause the apocalypse. I mean, it's just different worlds. I think they did a great job portraying abusive relationships, both familial and romantic. Of course, between Maddie and Nate, I think that was a realistic portrayal of an abusive relationship where Maddie's in love with him, and even though he literally chokes her to the point of her getting bruises, she's willing to defend him and not rat him out to the police, and goes through so much to make sure that she and her man can stay together, because she doesn't see it as abusive, or maybe she does and she's denying it. But either way, I think that is very realistic, because we always tell people like, oh, well, if they hurt you, just leave. Why don't you leave them? Like, he literally tried to kill you almost in that scene behind those trailers, and you stayed with him? What the heck? Like, that's how abusive relationships work, y'all. Like, you get manipulated into believing that either that's what you deserve, or that, well, no, they really love you and they didn't mean it, or, you know, they didn't mean to hurt you, or even if they did mean to hurt you, you deserved it in some way, or just forgive them, they won't do it again, it's okay. Nate is a very good manipulator, a lot like his father, who he also has an abusive relationship with, because his father is a piece of work. His father is taking out his own undealt with problems and his aggression on his son, making his son more aggressive, and having like a weird episode of like looking like he's demon possessed. I don't know what that was about, but like, I get it. But it was scary, because I was like, we been knew this man was demon possessed, and now here's the demon making him writhe on the floor and give himself a concussion. On a more subtle note, there's just growing pains of growing up. You know, Rue trying to reconnect with her old friend who she only ever went to when she needed clean pee for a drug test, and now she's like, no, I really want to reconnect with this person, and them, you know, at a skating rink just being kids again. I think it's such a hard thing to balance, because she's already had to go through so much adult stuff in her life of losing her father to cancer and having to go to rehab for drug addiction, and just being in the world of drugs and that world of being around a drug dealer and that danger situation. She's still a kid, and she still wants to be a kid and not have so much weight of being an adult on her shoulders already at such a young age. And there's so much to be said about her relationship with her mom and her sister. Not only did Rue lose her father, but her mom lost her husband, and she's having to stay strong to make sure her daughters don't feel like they also lost their mother to grief. So she's having to deal with her own grief and kind of keep it bottled up and take care of her daughter Rue, who's addicted to drugs and had to go to rehab and is still consistently doing drugs. Even though her pee is clean, her mom mom knows something's wrong. Our parents know more than we realize growing up, and we think that we're fooling them, and we never really are. And then having to watch her own sister start to go down her same path by finding her, you know, at the carnival smoking pot with a couple of people. And it's like seeing herself and her younger sister, and she doesn't want that for her younger sister. She thinks that doing drugs only affects her, but that's when she's really realizing that it affects people around her more than she realized. You know, she knew maybe she was hurting her mom and her sister by doing it, but it's not just hurting them, but it can also derail her sister's life because her sister can follow in her footsteps. But I like that they were able to maintain a close relationship throughout the show, that the writers didn't decide to like break that apart just for the sake of drama. They never fought to a point of like destroying the relationship, because I think that would just be another element of drama that was unneeded. It would have been unnecessary, so I appreciate the writers for not doing that. And I might get some hate for this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I loved the portrayal of friendship between Rue and Jules. I mean, I know that, you know, Rue had a crush on her and started falling for her even more as the show went on, but I liked that in the beginning, when they were just friends, it was still a very sweet friendship, even when there was no romantic aspect, especially on Jules' side. How Jules would just take Rue in and they would like cuddle in her bed, and she would just like stroke her head and just be there to comfort her. And I love that. I love seeing friendships that can be just as fulfilling as romantic relationships, because I think we need to put more importance into platonic relationships. You can be fulfilled through platonic friendships and relationships and familial relationships. It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. We put so much importance on romance and having like the one person who's gonna complete you. False. Ain't gonna happen, okay? You're gonna be unsatisfied if you're looking for one person to be everything you need, because they're not gonna fulfill you. They can't. It doesn't matter if it's the perfect person for you, your literal soulmate. You need more than one person, and you need more than one person to show you love and to show you affection, literal physical affection. That is so important, and we're so deprived of it. This isn't even about the show at this point, but taking it back to the show, I loved that. I know that it ended sort of, you know, becoming a romantic thing, but I liked it in the beginning when they were just friends and they were hugging each other and cuddling with each other, and that was okay, because that should be okay. We should be allowed to show physical affection to our friends to that point, because that's sort of how it used to be, you know, years and years ago. We have issues with, you know, expressing affection to each other whenever it's not in a romantic way, because we don't want anything to be misconstrued. I don't know. But that should be allowed between boys and girls. I'm not saying you need to like be kissing on each other just because you're friends, but hug your friends. Cuddle with your friends, lay your head on your friend's shoulder, hold hands with each other when you walk down the street. If people think you're gay, then so be it. You know there's nothing romantic going on, so hold hands, link arms, be the guys from Queer Eye, just snuggle with each other, lay your legs on each other. That should be fine, because that's healthy. It's just affection. You just are letting your friend know you love them, not that you want to make out with them or have sex with them. It's just your friend. Maybe you do, but but what I'm saying is that should also be okay for platonic relationships. Woo, I dug myself in a hole just then. All right. Now that I've talked about the things that I really liked about the show, there are a lot of good things about the show that I maybe didn't cover. So just because I didn't say it doesn't mean I don't also agree with you that something was good. But I want to get to the cons, because I'm gonna have to spend a little while talking about it. And I recognize that most people are not going to agree with me, but I just want you to hear me out. I wanted to just open a discussion about Euphoria that isn't about attacking each other, calling each other horrible things because we have different opinions on stuff. I just want to talk about the show, because the show, I think, is meant to spark discussion. I want to talk about pornography. Now, this has two branches. First, they literally show it. Now, you might disagree with me, but there were so many naked people in the show. An unnecessary amount. Specifically guys. Like, usually it's girls that are shown naked, but the girls are mostly just topless in the show. Realistic portrayal, whatever. But it was genuinely unnecessary at many points in time. I'm like, this didn't need to be here. It didn't add anything to the story. It didn't add anything to the scene. It didn't add anything whatsoever other than an unnecessary penis in a scene that but why was it there? Why? It didn't need to be there. Girls are already bombarded with pictures of those things that we don't ask for. I don't want to go and watch a show to just wind down and chill and then be bombarded with more I didn't ask for. And then of course the scenes of people actually having sex, it just, Honestly, like, I'm not trying to be a prude about it, but my problem is the fact that this show is marketed towards teenagers, because as an adult, I was honestly just grossed out and bothered by how much they bombard you with sexual content. I would never want my teenager watching that stuff. As an adult, I didn't even want to see that. I definitely don't want my 15, 16-year-old watching that, or God forbid even 13 or 12-year-old watching that. You know, if it was like Game of Thrones, which I didn't watch, but you know, that's marketed towards adults, so while it's still like unnecessary in some ways, at least it's marketed towards adults. Euphoria was definitely marketed towards teenagers. It's about teenagers in high school. Like, yeah, it's adult issues as far as like drug addiction goes, but teenagers struggle with that. Like, if you're gonna show two characters laying on the ground after having sex, like, you can just show them from the waist up. Like, what was the point of showing full body, just them laying there? Like, to show how awkward it is? Like, it's already awkward by the way they're acting in the dialogue. That doesn't add anything other than an element of ew. But again, it's outside of my own, like, upon seeing that stuff. It's just the fact that it's so borderline pornographic and it's marketed at teenagers. That's not okay, because let me get to my second point about it. They really tried to normalize porn in the show. There were so many times in just like the first 2 episodes where they kept saying, oh, it's normal to watch porn. Everybody does it. Everyone watches it. It's normal. Everyone might do it, but it's not normal. And here's why. Just because everyone doesn't mean it's okay. If your friends jump off a bridge, does that mean you would too? Yes, but that's besides the point. The argument is just because everyone's doing it doesn't necessarily mean that you should, nor that it's good. If I haven't lost you already, I'm going to lose you here. Pornography is not good. Now, moral stuff aside, this isn't about like repressing your sexuality or whatever. This is about how porn physically alters your brain and its chemicals and the way it views other human beings, both male and female. There have been so many psychological studies done how watching that changes how you view other human beings. You may not believe me, you might want to argue with me in the comments, but this isn't me saying this. This is science. This is people who've conducted studies and replicated the studies over periods of time, and how it always comes back the same. You're more likely to view people as objects, as things to be used and then discarded. Things to be used for pleasure and nothing more, that the relationship doesn't matter. They're just there to satisfy you and your needs, and that's it. I know how that sounds, and you're like, me? Never. I would never do that. I mean, you might be the exception to the rule, but it's affecting your brain. Whether you want to believe it or not, it is. It might be a slow progression, but it affects your brain. It affects the chemistry in your brain and how your neurons fire whenever it comes to sexual interaction, pleasure, whatever. It alters that. And so whenever you encounter a situation like that in your real life, your brain can kind of switch back to that mode that it gets in when you watch that kind of content. It kind of takes away your empathy and your ability to have a relationship with that person and ability to have intimacy beyond physical stuff. You can disagree with me and science as a whole on that, but also consider this. Most porn, this is not made up, again, this is not my opinion, this is actual studies done. Most porn that you consume is a product of sex trafficking. And by watching that, you are supporting sex trafficking. What? No, I would never support sex trafficking. Never in my life. That's horrible. That's the worst thing in the world. Well, when you watch porn, the person who makes it makes money. And most times, people who make it are sex traffickers. The people in the movie, whatever you want to call it, the people in the content you're watching are most likely sex trafficked. The girls might look happy, but it's because they drug them. Same with the guys. Sometimes the guys aren't trafficked, sometimes they are. Most of the time the girls are trafficked, and they are given drugs to make them look happy, or maybe they weren't trafficked, but they were tricked into it, and now it's an industry they can't get out of, even though they want to. But by watching porn, you are supporting sex trafficking, because that's what so much of it comes from. And someone might produce to adults in a film, but they also produce child pornography, and you just may not watch that, may not know, but you're giving that person who produces that other illegal stuff money, okay? I mean, you can't track it down. You can't track down the director and the actors and make sure through background checks that they're decent people. You can't do that every time you got an itch to scratch, you know what I mean? It's not healthy for you or for the people that are involved. Literally no one wins in pornography. The actors and you, the consumer, don't win. The only person that wins is the person profiting off of the labor of others that are probably most likely forced in some way, coerced, drugged, however you want to view it, whether they chose that industry or not, they're trying to get out and they can't. There's very little, it exists, of course, but there's very little porn that is produced where everyone is happy with what's going on, where everyone wants to be involved. Don't come after me in the comments. Well, come after me, I don't freaking care, but it's so little. There's no such thing as ethical porn. By the time you do the research and maybe find yourself some ethical porn, I'm sure the urge to watch it has already passed. So it's just not worth looking for. So again, my problem is this is marketed towards teenagers. We're telling teenagers, oh, it's normal, everyone does it, when it will literally alter their brain for possibly the rest of their life because they can get addicted to it just like anything and they can't stop watching it, and then it literally alters their brain and their brain chemistry at a young age when their brain chemistry is already completely out of whack. And then they carry that for the rest of their life. They carry either the addiction to it or the mindset that comes from it. And then they expect anyone they sleep with to be like the people in the videos that they watch, or they just kind of disconnect and disassociate and only view people as objects to be used for pleasure. It ruins them. And then they're also supporting sex trafficking, a thing that I'm pretty sure all of us agree is bad and no one wants to support it. And yet, by encouraging teenagers and telling them that's okay, you're encouraging them to support sex trafficking. So just a heads up, a great way to protest sex trafficking is to stop watching porn. Don't give them money. Don't support them. I'll be honest, I'm not sure if I'll watch season 2. I might, but there'll be a lot of stuff I have to skip through. I don't know. At this point, the only thing I'm interested in is Rue and her journey through overcoming drug addiction. Leave the unnecessary amount of sexual content to 13 Reasons Why and just call it a day. And I'm sure my comparison between Euphoria and 13 Reasons Why is frustrating and annoying, but I feel like they sort of should be compared because they both have similar agendas and a similar audience. They're both targeted at teenagers and they both deal with real problems. It's just how they portray them. Euphoria does a better job than 13 Reasons Why, and that's why I wanted to compare them, because they are similar in their objective and in their message and in their, well, not their message. Hi, this is editing me on a different day. No, I didn't make my bed for this. I didn't feel like I'd get over it. I wanted to add a point that kind of goes along with this point, and it's that there are certain things in the show that are traumatic to the characters, and that's fine. There are certain things that we as the audience need to see and understand to empathize with them, but there are some things that we don't need to see because it also in a way traumatizes us, and we can still empathize without getting the gory details and the visuals that go along with the trauma the characters faced. For a specific example, there's Jules when her mom forcibly admits her into a mental hospital. Now, that's fine. That whole thing is very important to show, and it makes you empathize with Jules and gives you a better understanding of her character and where she's coming from. But they didn't need to show so explicitly what that man did to her, that man who exposed himself to her and was masturbating in front of her. That's a traumatizing thing to see for anybody. If I'm walking down the street and a man flashes himself at me and does that, I'm gonna be horrified. So to be watching a show and to not expect that coming and all of a sudden that's flashed in your face, that's essentially like that happening to you as well as the character. And while I might understand where they're coming from as they want you to empathize with her and it's like, oh, you experienced this with her, so you feel her trauma, that's very dangerous and not the way to go about it. I don't need to be traumatized in order to empathize with someone's trauma. They could have alluded to that happening or showing the man's face and like making you understand that's what's happening without actually showing the act of it, and it still would get the point across and would still make me empathize with her, feel bad for her. Sorry, the camera's shaking. My dog's deciding to lay on my tripod and lick himself right now while I'm filming. Thank you, sir. I understand that they wanted us to empathize with the characters, and that's fine. That's good show writing, but we don't need to empathize with them to the degree of we went through the trauma with them and that we had to witness it with our own eyes. That's just unnecessary and not healthy for the viewer and their own mindset, because now those images are going to haunt them. And I get it's like, well, it had to haunt these people. Those are characters. They're not real. And I've been through some crap in my life. And yes, I want people to empathize with me, but I understand that they can do that, one, without having to go through exactly what I went through, and two, I would never wish that they would go through it just so they could understand, because we are capable of empathy for things that we've not been through. Specifically, we can draw from past experience, we can draw from the experience of others. We don't need to see horrific graphic images and horrific things happening to people and experience it as if it's happening to us in order to understand. If that's the case, then we are way worse than I ever could have realized. That if you can't empathize with someone who, say, has been raped without watching the rape happen, that's inconceivable. And to assume that your viewer is incapable of that is to assume that your viewer is too dumb, or you're just doing it for the shock factor, both of which are bad writing. If the viewer doesn't get it, that's on them, that's not on you, and don't show traumatizing things just for the shock factor. Last but most certainly not least is how the show leaves you feeling. Now, while I mentioned that it's beautifully shot and beautifully colored and choreographed and how it feels like a music video when you're watching it, and the fact that it ended with a music video, that was really cool. At the end of the day, the show leaves you feeling bad. It leaves you feeling a little kind of sick to your stomach in some ways. You know, other than the music video at the end, it still leaves you kind of with a feeling of hopelessness or feeling drained. That's maybe the word for it. You feel very drained after watching it. As much as I think it's important to touch on subjects that are touchy, that aren't, happy, and that are serious things, I think just for the sake of the consumer, to not end a show feeling like crap. We want to get lost in a world where for once the good guys do win, because it does feel like they lose in real life. So we want to watch something where the heroes win and don't die for the sake of winning. I'm looking at you, Russo brothers. I was already feeling a little meh, and then I was like, well, I'll watch this show because maybe it'll help take my mind off things. And all it did was just put my mind in a more dark place than when I started. That might be more of an individualistic thing. Maybe most people don't deal with that, or maybe most do, but some don't. So it's marketed towards those people. But I'm just saying, if you're prone to depressive episodes, honestly, stay away from it. I just want to chime in here and say that I will always recommend Insatiable for anyone who wants to watch a show that deals with real world problems, because it does it in a way that doesn't leave the viewer traumatized or leaves you feeling sick to your stomach, because there is no explicit content. They're able to handle these issues that are very touchy without disturbing imagery. They're able to deal with LGBTQ+ issues without having to show you explicit sexual content. And they do this across the board with both teenagers and adults. They also deal with drug addiction, of course, though not to the same degree as Euphoria. And even though the show as a whole doesn't really have a happy ending by any means, it still doesn't leave you feeling sick to your stomach and depressed after you watch it. You still enjoyed the experience and the ride, and you aren't left with a feeling of hopelessness or feeling drained. Because like I said, not everything has to end happy. It just needs to end without leaving the viewer in a lower mental state than before. Anyway, if you're gonna support shows like Euphoria, you definitely should support Insatiable. It's hypocritical not to. So yeah, while I had a ton of pros in the beginning, my cons are so heavy that I think they outweigh the pros. As beautiful as it was shot, as interesting as the story was, all of that can't really outweigh the detrimental effects it can have on your mental health. Yikes. Alright, I think I'm out of things to say. I've already talked so much about this show. Please don't watch the show if you're under 18, and even then, use discretion. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting angry at me and leaving hateful comments. I love that for me. My social media is in the description, and other things you can click on, Patreon, whatever. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
I put my foot in my mouth